We've heard a lot about Vladimir Putin in recent years, but few truly know his story. It begins in 1952 in Leningrad, today's St. Petersburg. His father, Vladimir Spiridonovich Putin, fought in the Red Army during World War II before returning to factory work, like so many demobilized soldiers after victory over Nazi Germany. His mother, Maria Ivanovna, also endured the horrors of the siege of Leningrad before taking a job in a railway plant. Hardship, austerity, and the lingering memory of war weighed heavily on his parents, and it was in this atmosphere that young Vladimir grew up. The family lived in a cramped communal apartment, a single room for the three of them, while the kitchen, bathroom, and toilets were shared with several other families. Privacy was nearly non-existent. Out in the snowy streets of Leningrad, Putin's character was shaped among the neighborhood's rough kids. Drinking, smoking, and fistfights started early. He was restless, combative, and to many seemed destined for a bleak future. Two mentors changed that trajectory. First, his German teacher, Vera Gurevich, who saw in him a unique spark. She took him to museums, introduced him to classical music and Russian literature, and tried to open his mind to a world beyond the streets. Then came his judo coach. Martial arts were highly respected in the Soviet Union, and his coach noticed Putin's fighting instinct, steering him toward more disciplined training in judo and sambo, a Russian combat sport. That path also brought him into the orbit of the KGB, which often recruited from these circles. As a teenager, Putin already dreamed of becoming a spy. Kerr's Soviet TV series, 17 Moments of Spring, portraying a kind of red James Bond, fueled his imagination. But the KGB wasn't just about muscle. It required education and intellectual rigor. In 1970, at age 18, he enrolled at Leningrad State University's law faculty. He studied political philosophy, honed his German, and wrote his thesis on international trade. By the time he graduated in 1975, he was ready to enter the world of state security. Reality, however, was far less glamorous than his childhood fantasies. Assigned to counterintelligence, Putin began at the bottom of the hierarchy, stuck with dull bureaucratic work. In 1983, he married Lyudmila, his longtime partner. She soon discovered he wasn't a policeman, as he had told her, but an intelligence officer. Despite the secrecy, their marriage endured, and they had two daughters, Maria and Katerina. By 1984, at age 32, Putin was sent to Moscow to train at the elite Andropov Red Banner Institute, the KGB's finishing school. There he received full training and was given the codename Platov. A year later, he was posted abroad. His hopes of being sent to London, Paris, or New York evaporated quickly. His assignment was Dresden, East Germany, under Soviet control. His mission there was to recruit informants. But again, boredom set in. Then history shifted. In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. In Dresden, protesters threatened to storm KGB offices. Putin, alarmed, focused on protecting his family and arranging their return to Leningrad, now St. Petersburg. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, the former spy had to reinvent himself. He lived in fear, at times sleeping with a gun under his pillow, but soon realized his future lay within the new democratic Russia. In 1991, he joined Anatoly Sobchak, the newly elected mayor of St. Petersburg, as an advisor. Discreet but influential, Putin was tasked with overseeing foreign investments. The city attracted capital, but the process was opaque. Whispers of personal enrichment soon followed. When Sobchak lost re-election in 1996, Putin resigned out of loyalty. But by then, his name was already circulating in Moscow. He joined the presidential administration and gradually climbed the ranks. In 1998, he was appointed director of the FSB, the KGB's successor agency. In this role, he proved loyal to the oligarchs, even helping maneuver against Prosecutor General Yuri Skuratov, who had been digging too deeply into corruption. Such loyalty made him an ideal ally for Russia's powerful elite. A year later, while on vacation in France with his family, he received word from oligarch Boris Berezovsky. The ruling class saw him as a potential successor to the ailing and weakened President Boris Yeltsin. Only weeks later, Yeltsin named him prime minister. At the time, Putin was largely unknown to ordinary Russians, but the country was reeling from a wave of terrorist attacks, and he projected firmness. On October 1, 1999, he launched the Second Chechen War. His image as a strongman began winning over public opinion. On December 31, 1999, Boris Yeltsin resigned. Vladimir Putin became acting president of the Russian Federation. In just a few months, the scrappy street kid from Leningrad, the frustrated spy in Dresden, had become the most powerful man in Russia. Even before the election, he had to stage the appearance of a campaign. It was the year 2000. His image needed shaping. A man of the people, heir to Russia's military and imperial traditions, capable of awakening national nostalgia. He traveled across the country, shook hands, appeared on television, careful always to avoid true debates. On March 26th, the result was no surprise. Putin won outright in the first round with nearly 53% of the vote. Yeltsin, the man who had elevated him, waited for a call of thanks that never came. The message was clear. This was not continuity, it was rupture. Putin promised Russians two things: to raise their standard of living and to restore Russia's global influence. He presented himself both as a wartime leader, while the Chechen conflict raged, and as a head of state determined to rein in the unchecked power of the oligarchs. At the time, the country was fractured. Pro-Western reformers, Soviet nostalgics, monarchists. To unite them, he drew from multiple traditions. He kept the Soviet anthem's melody, but gave it new lyrics, restored the pre-revolutionary tricolor flag, and, at least on the surface, extended a hand to the West. In 2001, he gave a conciliatory speech at the Bundestag. After 9/11, he backed George W. Bush in the fight against terrorism. Putin spoke to everyone, exploiting every side to his advantage. This was the birth of the Putin consensus. If life seemed better than in the chaotic 1990s, people supported him, even as the authoritarian drift became more apparent. Two pillars defined his rule: the vertical of power, strengthening the authority of the center at the expense of the regions, and the dictatorship of law, bringing major corporations back under Moscow's control. The iron grip tightened. In 2004, he was triumphantly re-elected with 71% of the vote. Soon after, at the 60th anniversary of victory over Nazi Germany, he described the collapse of the USSR as the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. The anti-Western turn became clearer. At the Munich Security Conference in 2007, he delivered a manifesto-like speech denouncing American hegemony, a doctrinal high point. This hardening was also shaped by the geopolitical climate. Georgia and Ukraine moved closer to the West in 2003-2004, casting doubt on Putin's promise of a greater Russia. At home, his methods raised concerns. The Kursk disaster in 2000, when a nuclear submarine sank and killed 118 sailors, shocked the nation. The Kremlin's refusal to accept foreign help at first, and its clumsy handling of communication, stunned the public. One obstacle remained: the Constitution limited presidents to 2 consecutive terms. In 2008, Putin orchestrated the election of his loyal ally Dmitry Medvedev as president, who in turn named Putin prime minister. The roles were swapped, but the political line remained the same. Medvedev tried to carve out his own priorities: anti-corruption efforts, digital modernization, but Putin's shadow loomed large. In August 2008, Russia invaded Georgia. A short war, a clear message. From behind the scenes, Putin remained the true center of gravity. He was already preparing his return in 2012. Meanwhile, he cultivated his public image, shirtless on horseback, fishing, piloting planes, training as a soldier, virile icons of restored order. But the digital openness encouraged under Medvedev stirred society. In 2011-2012, large anti-Putin protests erupted in Moscow. "A Russia without Putin," chanted the opposition, joined by figures like Garry Kasparov. The candidate remained unmoved, denouncing Western manipulation and waiting for election day. On March 4, 2012, he returned to the Kremlin with 64% of the vote. His rhetoric hardened: patriotism, traditional values, open conservatism, and a close alliance with the Orthodox Church. He divorced Lyudmila, but cast himself as the guardian of Russia's roots. On the international stage, he felt Russia was being dismissed. Barack Obama called it a regional power, a humiliating label. Putin doubled down on soft power, expanding RT and Sputnik. In 2014, he annexed Crimea, reunification according to Moscow. He also sought to polish Russia's global image, the Sochi Olympics 2014, the World Cup 2018. Putin aimed to make Russia indispensable again. In 2018, he was re-elected to a fourth term with 77% of the vote. He promised a Russia for all, powerful and prosperous. In 2020, a constitutional reform paved the way for him to remain in power until 2036. Opposition leader Alexei Navalny was imprisoned in 2021. In February 2022, Putin recognized the separatist republics of Donbass and then announced a special military operation in Ukraine. Despite Western condemnation, he pressed on. The image of him seated at an absurdly long table opposite Emmanuel Macron became a symbol of impossible dialogue. On March 18, 2022, at Moscow's Luzhniki Stadium, he addressed a massive crowd. Russia, he declared, was embracing a vision of civilizational confrontation. Since his return to the Kremlin in 2012, the line has been clear: centralization, conservatism, projection of power, and distrust of the West. In Putin's worldview, two worlds are locked in conflict, and only one, he believes, must prevail.